Good morning, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this, the first of a series of 3 webinars that we have connecting up interests in AgriTech between Ireland and New Zealand. It really is my pleasure to be involved in these sessions, connecting up what I consider to be my 2 homes. The fact that those 2 homes are each bilingual countries means that I get to mispronounce at least 2 languages and several times 3 languages. So please give me some forgiveness on that. Ko airangi toko motu, ko Avon Nagalav toko awa, ko Kuan Nagalav te wana, ko te tiriti te waka. Inaine keti noho ho I tamaki makoro ko wataku I tenari ko toka mahi AgriTech ko Brendan O'Connell toko ingoa. So my name is Brendan O'Connell. Really delighted to host you here today. My work is in AgriTech with AgriTech New Zealand, and I'm delighted to host this in partnership with the AgTech Ireland team, many of whom are joining us online today, both as speakers and obviously in the audience. So you're all very welcome, along with all of the AgriTech New Zealand members and other guests who've joined as well. Galway is originally home for me, and I'm actually a stone's throw from the River Corb, which I just introduced there briefly in my Maori Pepiha. That river's pretty important to me. It managed to dislocate my shoulder many years ago when I was kayaking, taught me how to fish, and it flows into into Galway Bay, of course, where my dad's ashes are laid. So I'm in a very special place for myself. And delighted now that I'm living in Auckland and living in West Auckland in the Waitakuris to be able to connect up these 2 AgriTech ecosystems and be part of that. So very welcome to all of our members today as well. Today it's sort of a game of 3 halves, if you'd excuse that phrase. We have 3 different sessions where we're bringing together some AgriTech thought leaders and leaders from the sector, agribusiness leaders who also have a strong interest around AgriTech, and then some public commentary around the environments. We all know how many similarities there are between the 2 countries. There is no country on the planet more similar to Ireland than New Zealand, and vice versa, and that very strongly applies to our farming and productive practices, and also the role that we have in the world as small successful nations, and the role that we can have in many different regards. We're not going to cover those things that we sort of know so well together here today, because I think that's well known to the audience. What we're going to unpack is what are some of the changing conditions that both countries are seeing within the ecosystems around these innovation systems, these innovation in the early part of our food systems, and what that means. And so to make sure we make good use of time, I'll kick off our first session straight away. I will, from our process point of view, we've got a pretty packed session today. So we're going to throw some really great content at you because we've got some great speakers. We'll have some discussion online. The chat's turned off. We do have Q&A open. We're going to be pretty tight for time. But if you have a burning question and you're able to put it together in a nice, succinct, well-formed way, I will do my best to bring that in and make sure that's what we get the speakers to talk about. Can't make any promises. The better you form the question, the more likely I'm going to be able to pull it in and make sure that we do that. I would like to kick off in the first session. Now, this is sort of a presidential debate because we have the chair of AgriTech New Zealand, Bridgit Hawkins, and the chair of AgTech Ireland, Padraig Hennessy, speaking on their perspectives that they've seen in the AgriTech ecosystem in each country. There is going to be no discussion about anybody eating anybody else's pet. That's not a topic that we're going to be allowed to go to today.
Brendan, I'm not making any promises.
Okay. I can see we're going to have. We'll see how we go. Hey, Padraig, if you can work it in, you're welcome to. So it has to be appropriate though. I'll let the guys introduce themselves, but I'll start by introducing my own chair. So this is always the careful one when you're introducing your own boss. Bridgit and myself have been friends for a very long time. We've both been working in the agri-tech sector, both in previous lives where we were collaborating on various things. Obviously, in recent years, where Bridgit from her entrepreneurial successes and work with CropX and other businesses has built up a real leadership role and understanding about what it takes to run an agri-tech business, and volunteers her time in leading the industry association that I'm contracted to work with, very happily to do so. And so, Bridgit, I might hand it over to you to do any further introduction and let us know some of your thoughts around what's happening in the agri-tech ecosystem.
Oh, thanks very much, Brendan, and welcome everybody. It's great to have such an interested audience at this time of the evening during the week here. So as Brendan said, he and I have known each other for, well, probably 15 years or more. And really when we, our association started when things like the cloud, sensors, a lot of what underpins technology today or AgTech today was really coming to the fore and becoming more accessible. So I ended up having my own business called Regen, which I founded in 2010 and exited 4 years ago to CropX, who is a global agri-tech company. And I still work for CropX on a part-time basis as the Chief Sustainability Officer. And I'm involved in the AgriTech accelerator sprout, so mentor and see quite a lot of early stage companies. And 3 years now I've been in the role, been privileged to be in the role of chair of AgriTech New Zealand. So it's a really interesting space to be in, and it's great to share some of where AgriTech in New Zealand has got to and is looking to go to, and how that might compare with what's happening over in Ireland. So I think initially one of the for those of you from New Zealand in the audience, you'll all remember that we had an election last year and a change of government, and that's brought a lot of changes across everything in New Zealand. So, but for AgriTech, when we look at it, it's very much a bit of a yin and yang, because on the one hand, we had some reasonably supportive government funding that underpinned the industry transformation plan and enabled a lot of activities to be funded and supported, a lot of bringing together of the ecosystem, identification, really helping us as a membership organisation invest in developing our identity and what AgriTech means and what we are as a sector. However, that funding ended, and there's no sign of anything replacing it at the end of June. But conversely, the new government's one of their key planks is to grow or to double export revenues in the next 20 years, I think, 10 years. I haven't fixated on the date, but to double export revenues. And one of the reasons for that, or one of the enablers in that, is AgriTech. They obviously in New Zealand, the primary sector is a big driver of export revenue, and having technology solutions to support the growth and increased efficiency of our primary sector exports, and at the same time to have AgriTech businesses themselves grow and expand is what the government's expecting. So on the one hand, they're not going to fund it, but they're expecting it's going to happen. So we're still working through that and seeing, as an organisation where we can leverage off the great base that we've got. The other, I guess, key thing that's happened, and it's sort of slowly but surely, is some of our larger organisations in the primary sector have really started to think about how they can participate more actively in the AgriTech ecosystem. So rather than just working in within their own businesses, doing their own innovation, often incrementally, there's quite a number of them now that are investing either in a venture fund or similar behaviours like a venture fund, really actively looking to collaborate with other organisations. So that's a big shift for us, and I think that shows that this more open view of where innovation is going to come from and how to accelerate it. And it's not more business as usual is not actually going to get the rate of acceleration that we're looking for and that we need. So that's, just at a really high level what's happening here in New Zealand. And I'll probably leave it there and pass the talking stick back. We can dig into some of that later.
Yes, yeah. No, thanks. A couple of points there, Bridgit, and we've had conversations on them, and we'll dig into them a little bit. So that's really useful. And yes, some important changes that are happening here in New Zealand that sort of both important for us in New Zealand, but may actually have some learnings or some thoughts, provocation for people in Ireland. Padraig, again, we've known each other for quite a while back from some of the work that I do with Enterprise Ireland from time to time, and your own business, Terra NutriTECH. And obviously, in the establishment of AgTech Ireland, we've been able to have some good engagements over the last while. Really appreciate the job you're doing there, and really interested to hear your views of where things at here in Ireland and what's been happening in the AgriTech scene.
Sure, thank you, Brendan. And thanks to Bridgit for the overview from AgTech New Zealand as well. So kia ora and good evening to all our New Zealand friends and colleagues, and diagwit to everyone joining us this morning in Ireland. I'm Padraig, Hennessy, CEO of Terra NutriTECH, and we have, in Terra NutriTECH, we've developed a precision dosing system for minerals. So that's my angle from AgTech from my own perspective, and I'm very keen with the AgTech industry. And I'm also very proud to be chairperson of AgTech Ireland. It's been a busy year for us actually here this year. We've had a fact-finding mission to the Netherlands. We've had industry days where we've went to some of our members, one of them being Herdwatch. We've had information days with the Agricultural Science Association here in Ireland, and we've also been engaging quite actively with both national and European politicians to help drive policy. Because it's this policy that will have the biggest impact on AgTech in Ireland and Europe over the next 5 years. And Colin Markey, a bit later on, will share a bit more about this from a European perspective, from his experience as an MEP. But these sustainability targets, they're front and center, I suppose, in policy right now, and they're really going to shape the direction of AgTech in Ireland and Europe over the next decade. It's around the solutions around methane and nutrient use and improved soil health and pesticides, etc. And around the emissions, it's crucial because similar to New Zealand, agriculture contributes about 38% of Ireland's total greenhouse gas emissions here. And we have it now written into law that Ireland has a target of a 51% reduction by 2030. So this is a huge challenge for the agricultural industry here, but it's also a big opportunity for AgTech to be part of the solution, because it's really AgTech has been looked at for the solutions for this. And I know some of my Irish colleagues will laugh because I have a saying that I say every single time I talk is farmers can't work harder, they have to work smarter, and working smarter is working with AgTech. Another massive issue in Ireland at the moment is the nitrates derogation. This effectively is farmers that can use higher level of nitrogen from livestock manure than normally permitted in the EU nitrates directive. So basically, it allows us to utilize our natural advantage to grow grass and maintain a higher stocking rate. However, this is under serious threat due to poor water quality in Ireland, and losing it could impact both animal numbers and the production system we have here in Ireland. And again, AgTech can play a crucial role in this by offering tools that improve nutrient management and reduce environmental impacts like soil sensors, software, etc. And also helping farmers to apply fertilizer more efficiently and effectively. These innovations will not only help boost farm productivity, but they'll also help in the fight for us to keep derogation here in Ireland, which is one of the biggest challenges really over the next couple of years for the Irish agricultural system. Really for farmers, but that is going to have a huge and potentially detrimental effect on AgTech and the uptake of AgTech when margins are cut further. But look, it's not all bad news. Ireland has seen a rise in AgTech startups in the last number of years, mostly focused on sustainability, precision farming, and automation. In fact, only this weekend, 6 AgTech businesses were featured in the Sunday Business Post Top 100 Startups to Watch. Now that's one of Ireland's premier business publications. Now this would have been unheard of just a few years ago. And when you add that to some of the global deals that have been announced by AgTech businesses here, new technology launches, investments, it's clear that the Ireland's AgTech ecosystem is actually looking quite bright. But there are challenges too. David Leydon, a board member of AgTech Ireland and head of food and agribusiness and ifac, he'll go into some more of those details about the current conditions in Ireland. The biggest challenge really for us here in Ireland around AgTech is adoption. It's getting farmers to adopt AgTech. There's often a lack of understanding or a fear of change of the current systems. Over the last 2 years, market volatility, rising input costs, and uncertainty around those future agricultural policies that I've mentioned have really held farmers back from making longer-term commitments and investing in AgTech. So it's certainly slowing up the modernization, I suppose, of AgTech and the ability for us to hit some of those targets going forward. Funding then of AgTech businesses has also been a challenge. We've seen kind of more of a reticence of VCs entering into the AgTech space here because of the long development cycles, the market volatilities, and also a lack of clear exit strategies, for investors, where mergers, acquisitions, IPOs aren't overly common in AgTech. So it's certainly slowing down money coming into the system as well. Probably the biggest challenge we've had here over the last 2 years is weather. And you'd think in Ireland would be well used to some grand soft days. But it's been colder temperatures in the last 2 years, there's been increased rainfall, and this has had a huge effect on farmers' ability to grow grass especially, and a massive effect on margins. And again, this has had a big effect on the uptake of AgTech solutions. But in saying all that, the coming years are going to have huge opportunities because, as I mentioned before, it's AgTech that will allow us to progress as an industry. And I believe AgTech Ireland is essential in order to get all of the AgTech industry together and engage with the other stakeholders. And we're going to continue fostering relationships and collaborations with all those stakeholders, while also engaging with policymakers, because there'll be some policy coming in the next number of years that will be essential for us to try and influence anyway. We're excited to be announcing soon an artificial intelligence in agriculture conference. AI, I think, is a game changer, and it's going to revolutionize both AgTech businesses and data-driven decisions on farm. We're going to be heading to probably France in early 2025, where we'll be exploring some of the financing landscape for AgTech businesses. On a personal note, I'm pleased to announce that I've soon become a member of the World Agriculture Forum, where I'll have the opportunity to promote AgTech adoption on a global platform as well, because we can't look at any one of these issues in isolation. We have to be looking at it from a global perspective. I'd just like to thank Brendan and the AgTechNZ team for putting this together, and Catherine as well from our own organisation for all her hard work. And I'll hand it back over to you, Brendan. Happy to engage in some discussion on this.
Great, thanks, Padraig. And yes, some great topics introduced by both of you there. And one of the things that strike me, and I think might be interesting to unpack, is this changing perception of AgriTech. So to see that type of success of AgriTechs in what is a very healthy ecosystem in Ireland for a whole pile of startups in other sectors, and to see AgriTechs performing well there is really interesting, Padraig. And yet you talk as well about the challenge in the VC space, which is a global response and a global challenge in those pieces, and also just these different perceptions of AgriTech. So maybe I'll just start first with, we all know that, if there's a problem in food systems, there's a problem in farming, AgriTech is there to solve, is to be a solution in that space. And so, working smarter, as you say, is exactly the right thing to do. And so there seems to be more acceptance of that by policymakers and by researchers as well. In other words, researchers understanding that the paths for their research to actually have impact is ultimately going to be through an AgriTech business, because that's the way things get extended. So, Bridgit, I just wonder, we've talked about how you talk about the changing situation in terms of government funding. I think one of the things that's been positive in New Zealand is how the Ministry for Primary Industries have been now viewing AgriTech. In that ITP period, if anything, NZT and Callaghan are continual champions for AgriTech in terms of technology exports and growing technology businesses, and that's consistent, even if it changes in funding pieces. MPI have grown their interest in AgriTech as an actual key enabler from what they're trying to achieve. Is that something you'd agree with, or something you'd comment on?
I think it's definitely, that's been our experience, that the focus within government, or the part of government that has its focus on AgriTech, has changed a wee bit since the change of government. But it's, I guess, the issue of adoption, or the challenge of getting adoption at scale. And I think that's one of the things, we've got the same challenge as in Ireland, but the imperative is even more. So, in New Zealand, we've got the big investment into AgriZero, which is a real focus on technologies that will help reduce methane emissions, which is a key requirement going forward in terms of the sustainability of livestock farming. But, they recognise that you've got to get the technology, and it has to start being used at scale in a very short time period, very much shorter time than we've ever had to adopt technology in the past. So the challenge has to be, how do we think about doing things differently? And so then we have done, where we sort of organically, and it was just left up to businesses to do great marketing and have a great value proposition and distribute it well. Something needs to be different than that to get the rate of change that will be needed. Now, MPI, obviously, through different agencies in its own work, has a lot of touch points through that whole primary sector. So, what role can they play in actually supporting a different model of how we accelerate adoption? And, it was interesting, Padraig, talking about how for you policy is one of the most important things coming up. It would reflect in New Zealand. I think the biggest driver of what we will have to meet is not government policy, but it's our international global customers, their expectations of us and what we will be delivering. And I think that's ahead of our policy. So it is interesting in, the Northern Hemisphere context, that the government European regulations are still what you're needing to see happen.
Yeah, that's definitely and I mean, we heard the same. I'm sure the same discussions going on in Ireland. That the markets are moving faster than the regulators are in terms of Scope 3 requirements and what that means in terms of new capabilities for reporting. So it's both that regulator piece, but very much so the Scope 3 and retailer drive as well. Are you seeing it in the same way?
I think, Brendan, the challenge there at the moment is, and I mentioned it, is the low margins for farmers at the moment, and it's really hard for them to change practices or to adopt when they're not making any money. And it's all very well saying that consumer sentiment is changing, and they're looking for lower methane milk or meat, but when there's no premium being put on that at the moment for farmers, it's very difficult for them to really adopt. And I think that's the bit in the jigsaw that will have to be figured out. Is it going to be carrot or is it going to be stick? Without that, farmers aren't going to adopt and erode their margins further, because it's very hard to adopt something when you literally have no margin on a bad year. So that's really the big challenge facing both AgTech and some of these environmental commitments, I think, over the next number of years.
Yeah, it's definitely the challenge of the sector, this balance of, productivity and environmental stewardship. I mean, I think that's, it's exactly the space we're all living, and there's different dynamics to it. But you're right, Padraig, that there's some parts of the system that are effectively broken. That farmers aren't necessarily getting rewarded for some of the change that they need to do that benefits the entire system, but all of the change is being vested back on them, and all of the investments is doing there. Of course, in the European scenario, there have been models and mechanisms to try and address that. They have. We talk all the time in New Zealand about farming without subsidies. Where it is entirely a market-driven approach for any of these changes. There's never been any direct support on farm. There's been plenty of supports on farm, but not financial supports for adopting technologies to address things where there have been. So when you think about adoption in Ireland, is it maintaining or increasing the level of support that might come from CAP or from other schemes, Padraig, that you're hoping will ease that pain and enable that change.
Yeah, it certainly has. We've one scheme here called TAMS that helps to modernise investment onto farms, and that's certainly for any specific
TAMS, did you
technologies
say?
within that. TAMS,
Oh,
TAMS.
yeah.
Any specific technologies within that sphere certainly has helped with the uptake of the adoption of technology on those farms. It's probably looking like when CAP changes in a number of years, there will be a bit more focus on sustainability, and potentially some of those other technologies will come in, whether it's methane inhibitors, etc. Nobody really knows that yet, and it'll be probably another year or 18 months before there's any real sense of that. I think Colin will have a better idea on what direction that is going. But overall, it's difficult to see where mass adoption is going to happen without a good financial incentive really for farmers in order to change. Change is slow, and if you want it to happen quickly, it's going to have to be quite an impressive, I believe, grant system or aid or price increase for lower carbon, milk, meat, etc., for that to happen, because otherwise change is not going to happen quick enough. I've said this to senior politicians here in the country. I believe there's going to be utter panic here in 2027, 2028, when we're very far away from hitting any of these targets, and we're 2-3 years out from having to hit them. And I think then there's going to be possibly policies brought in too quick at that stage, and possibly not even thought out properly. I think it's being kind of pushed on the back burner at the moment. From a policy perspective, they're kind of looking for some magic solutions to come out of AgTech. And I'm not sure if there's going to be one magic solution. I think there's going to be an array of small bullets, no silver bullet.
Very similar conversations happening in New Zealand, and I've been challenged at different times around the technology optimism that some of New Zealand's policies are relying on, so much as it's an interesting role for us to play as champions for AgriTech, because of course, we fully aspire for AgriTech to have the impact that we know it can have, and yet there's a lot of work to do in terms of bringing the solutions forward. And so, how do you feel, Padraig, about people saying technology is going to solve this for us as a technology leader yourself?
We have to. It's all about being realistic, I suppose, and saying yes. I think we will play a huge role, but there's not going to be this magic solution that's going to come out in the morning and it's going to solve everything. That it's all 1% and 2%, along the journey in order to get us to 20, 30, 40%. There might be methane inhibitors. I know, look, there's plenty of trials going on around the world that might get us 40%, 50%. I know there's some magic figures being thrown out at 80 and 90%, but I think back to live trials, and if we're hitting 50%, it's going to be a huge win in the next 5 years. But after that, it's going to be all the little bits, whether it's genetics or manure management, etc. It's a lot of little pieces in the jigsaw is going to help to solve this puzzle.
100%.
I think sorry. I was just going to say, I think one of the other challenges, I quite agree with you, there's no one thing is going to be the answer. But within each of our countries, although we're small, there's a lot of difference, like different types of farms, different areas, different climates. So you think there's lots and lots of little pieces, and each little piece has to be able to be applied in a whole lot of different scenarios as well. And that's really challenging, as a technology developer, to make your solution have impact, but for quite small boutique sort of little customer groupings. And I think it makes what's complex even harder to have a solution that works at scale in enough scenarios for it to have a material impact.
which emphasizes, of course, why, collaborations in markets that are similar enough between New Zealand and Ireland means that those solutions are going to have to apply for exactly that reason, that some of the scale will come from, choices that are available to all of our farmers across both our nations and other nations that are, doing pastoral livestock systems, and what that really means. Everything you say, guys, Padraig, your depiction of basically, the combination of lots of small things, I think is exactly the model that's going to be required. Bridgit, you mentioned AgriZero, of course, and for those in the Irish audience that don't really, the AgriZero initiative is effectively a venture and catalyst initiative. It's a joint venture between large agribusinesses in New Zealand and our Ministry for Primary Industries, and they are taking a portfolio and multiple investment approach with the intention to also engage and support adoption through knowledge sharing more than anything else, and availability of a multitude of solutions for exactly the things that you talk about, Bridgit, that this will suit that farm and this farmer. Another solution will suit another farm and another farmer. They need choice, so there's not going to be one silver bullet, and it's a collection of those things. I suspect all of the topics that you guys have raised and contributed to here are going to flow on to many of our next sessions, and it is time to move on and introduce some more pieces. And I've already got ideas of some of the links that we have coming through for both for the sessions that follow. So, Bridgit and Padraig, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and ideas. Thank you both very much as well for the leadership that you give. I know it's volunteer work that you guys do to lead these associations. You've both got busy roles and other commitments, and yet you obviously understand and are as passionate about the sector as many of the rest of us are. So thank you very much for your own leadership and time for the sector.
Thank you.
And I always feel like these sessions are sort of the desert island dinner, where you get to choose, who are your favorite people and who do you get to spend time with. If I was to choose my favorite dinner, I would definitely have Padraig and Bridgit at that dinner, and I would also have Andrew and David, two very good friends, both significant leaders in their own space, in terms of agribusiness advisory services, agribusiness leadership, and the role that they play. So, guys, thank you very much for joining. Looking forward to having some discussion here, and I'm sure your thoughts have already been influenced as well by some of the conversation that we've just had with Bridgit and Padraig as well. So I'm sure we'll continue that on. David, I might hand over to you to make more complete introduction of yourself and your role, and maybe give us some of your thoughts around what's going on in the AgriTech scene, and feel free to play jazz on the previous conversation as well.
Okay, Gormagut, Brendan, the Vacarjas, Nua Halen, Agus Ineran, David Leydon is Adam Dunn, Tommy McCannara, Bia agus Gano Talaviekta la ifac. So, Brendan, in the spirit of bilingualism, I thought a little bit of Gaeilge would be no harm. So I head up food and agribusiness here in ifac, and just for our friends who don't really know who ifac are, we're a top 10 professional services firm here in Ireland, nearly 50 years in business, and we're also a cooperative with 500 employees around the country. We do all the stuff that Andrew does, tax and audit and accountancy. And then we also have a very good advisory offering for AgTech companies around market research, strategic planning, sustainability, and strategic communications. So the goal over the next few minutes, and Brendan has me on a tight timeline here, is just to give a sense, a couple of little vignettes from the Irish sector at the moment, what's happening at farm level, what's happening at SME or AgTech level, and then maybe just 2 slides on the Irish AgTech ecosystem. So the dairy sector to begin with. Quick timeline, last 20 years broadly. 2023, 21 years ago, 5.2 billion litres, 24,000 farms, 1.2 million cows. Roll on 5 years before quotas were removed, still at 5.2 billion litres, but dairy farm numbers had reduced. Head on to 2015, removal of quotas, already a big jump, 6.4 billion litres. 1.3 million dairy cows. Roll on again, we can see how quickly after the removal of quotas that milk production is increasing. We're at 7.3 billion litres, on to 2020, 8.3. And now around 2023, we're probably stable at around 8.5 billion litres. And the big worry at the moment is that, you know, we're going to reduce the number of litres over the coming years as age impacts on farmers, and as the nitrates derogation impacts on farmers and regulation impacts on farmers. So if you were to summarize, you could say milk production dramatically increased, consolidation has occurred at farm level, and while cow numbers have increased by 25%, milk production went up by 63%. So there's a bit of ag tech there, you know, the genetics in the cows, maybe the feeding regimes, our use of grass has all improved over the last 20 years. Why have I focused on dairying? Well, for any ag tech company that we work with, you know, dairying is the sector where the real adoption of technology is happening. So that's why we just focused on that there and not so much on the beef, sheep, or tillage side. If we look at our recent food and agribusiness report, which is, we started it in 2018 as a sentiment barometer of the sector, right? What's happening in the food and agribusiness sector in Ireland? And that includes all our ag techs. And again, what are people saying at the moment? What are company leaders? We interviewed 120 company leaders. Big opportunities over the next 12 months, launch new products and services, increase demand, exporting to new markets. And really, in this report, we really did focus on exporting to new markets. With the dairy sector plateauing, the companies we work with and the sector, that outward focus has to accelerate now if we're going to grow, if we're going to develop rural jobs and really high quality jobs. There's just a quick snapshot of Ireland in terms of exports. Where are our key markets? The UK, the States, throw Europe together, it's number 2, and then you're into China. How are people and companies getting into new markets? Direct export is very popular through a distributor, you know, and finding that right distributor is critical. And then setting up operations in other countries isn't so popular. What's helping export? So look at Enterprise Ireland here, and Brendan does some work for Enterprise Ireland, Padraig, and all the ag tech companies that are based in Ireland have got great assistance from EI over the past couple of years. So Enterprise Ireland are a real enabler of some of our export in this country in the ag tech sector. Sustainability targets was touched on, and look, I did note Bridgit saying that what customers will require is probably ahead of where legislation is. And what we found in this report is 44% of the companies that we interviewed are already getting sustainability information requests from their customers. And there's a plethora of legislation beginning to impact on the agri-food value chain. And I'm just going to annoy you now by naming out the 5 key pieces that we're seeing, right? And it's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, the Green Claims Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, and the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. So look at all these pieces of legislation will generally impact on the bigger entities first, the PLCs, but they're beginning to come down through the value chain because our companies are being asked for information so that it feeds into the PLC reports on their Scope 2 and their Scope 3 emissions. So that's a big deal. It was good to see in this year's report, you know, 75% of companies have either set sustainability targets or they're in the process of setting sustainability targets. That's a big deal. It means there's a baseline there to measure progress against. So that's a big positive. But that number of 44%, or we'll say 4 in 10 companies beginning to get sustainability data requests from their customers, that's just going to grow and really impact on behavior. 90% of companies are taking action. What are they doing? Reducing energy, reducing waste. Yeah, they're the 2 big dominant themes in terms of what climate action companies are taking. We talked about AI and it was touched off. So AI is a big deal. ChatGPT, like AI is around 40 years, but ChatGPT, it felt like something completely new when ChatGPT landed in 2 years ago. So 16% of the leaders that we interviewed are confident they have a good understanding of the applicability of AI in their business, be that in robotics or automation, or in terms of their marketing teams or their finance teams, how it can save time and money or make them more efficient or change their customer value proposition. 16%, look, it's not too bad. Like it's not great, but it's not too bad, because like AI is so new for so many people and so different. So look, we'd hope we're going to track that number for the next couple of years, and we hope that it keeps increasing. The big thing that we see with artificial intelligence is that you have to be experimenting, doing small pilots. Don't think that you can do that big transformative project and it'll all work out. I think the pilots are important. So we'd like to definitely see that 17% number increasing in terms of taking those small steps, experimenting, getting your little bits of verification right, making sure that you sort of have a good understanding of how to mine your data in an AI environment. So for AgTech companies, AI has to be part of their present and indeed their future. The final piece I'll go through now is just the AgTech community. There's a little graphic of Ireland and all the AgTech companies that for a recent report we looked at. So we spotted about 250 AgTech companies spread all around the country, good cluster in there around Dublin, different little clusters around the west of Ireland, and then down around Cork, where the main clusters around farm equipment, grass management, livestock herd management. So a good range there. And this is for a report we did for Be an Innovator in the west of Ireland. And we just looked at an AgTech company in the west of Ireland and, what are the local, national and international entities that are surrounding that company. So you can see it's quite a busy ecosystem. There's definitely need for plenty of signposting, but there's everything there from banks and colleges, advisors, and then all the supports that come at national level and the different accelerators. So you don't really have to take that in, but it's just to give you a sense of the ecosystem. And Padraig mentioned that the ecosystem is in a fairly healthy state. I 100% agree with him. It is in a fairly healthy state. We'd love to see a few more companies getting the scale that really impacts at a global level, where you see VCs coming in and saying, I want a piece of the action here. We don't have enough of those, but definitely the landscape is improving and the ecosystem is improving. And that's my piece, Brendan, and I'll hand back to you.
David, that's fantastic. Really fascinating set of slides, bits of information. I know there's going to be lots of people gagging to have a proper look at some of those slides as well. So we might lean on you to share some of those things afterwards. But again, all of that around the ecosystem development here, again, leaning into that burden of reporting and what that really sort of means for businesses. And also that adoption and scale piece. Again, that's a big part of the reason why some of these knowledge exchanges and some of the shared destiny that I think sort of lands between New Zealand and Ireland, Irish AgriTech, we're both needing to look for global scale. Each of our markets is actually small. So while we'll talk about all of the successes of, New Zealand businesses like LIC and Gallagher and Levno coming here, or the likes of JFC and McHale and Abbey coming to Ireland. We want to see all of that trade, but really it's the global scale that we're all looking for as well, because that's what's really going to drive pieces. So look forward to unpacking that a bit more on some of the discussion. Thank you very much, David. Andrew Tanakwe, really lovely to have your time. Please introduce yourself and maybe throw some more thoughts out there for discussion as well.
Sure, thanks, Brendan, and that was a brilliant presentation by David. So thanks a mil for that, David. You made me blush as a Māori with that introduction before about dinner guests, Brendan. So nō reira tēnei te mihi nui kia koe, mō tō manaake kia hau. E te puake e hau ki Pangaro ki nā reki o taku whaia. Ko mātātua te waka, ko Mangapo atu te moanga, ko Tuhoi te iwi, ko Andrew taku ingoa. So, nō reira and tēnā koutou katoa. It's really fantastic to be here, and thanks so much for having me. I was just saying in my pepeha there that I grew up on the heels of my mum in a place called Paingaroa, but I whakapapa to a place called Tuhoi, or to a region called Tuhoi. Paingaroa was pretty significant for me because firstly, I was part of the child labour pool growing up, where friends, families come and pick you up with this hope of going and hanging out with your friends and kind of working across the food and fibre sector. But you end up going and picking up hay and all this other stuff instead of actually playing. So yeah, my background sort of stems back about nearly 30 years now, working in food and agribusiness. I'm fortunate enough to have worked in both New Zealand and Ireland. Yeah, for those that don't know, I'm a naturalised Irish citizen, and I am a grad of Michael Smurf at Graduate Business School, so it's fantastic to be on the call. My day job here in New Zealand is head of KPMG Propagate, which is a dedicated food agribusiness and export advisory service for KPMG New Zealand. And the angle I took today to kind of share with you was the conversations that I'm having with execs and boards and chairs on where their kind of thinking is at. So like David, I'm on a bit of a tight schedule here, so I'm just going to skip through it a little bit, and we can come back to conversation. Don't be afraid to reach out. But there's 10 main things that I guess people are consistently talking to me, and it's not just recently, it's actually been over the last couple of years, so it's been quite interesting. Geopolitical tensions are obviously changing the way in which we look at some of our global markets. There's an increased scrutiny on the shipping of, primary producers, primary products from New Zealand to our global markets, because we are in quite a far off land in comparison to our markets. There's been a real increase in the conversation around distrust. And it's not just distrust at a geopolitical level, it's distrust at a consumer level. And what they're kind of getting into here is shifting away from what we would typically have trusted as institutions in that 20, 30 years ago, to who can you consumers actually trust, and the formats or the I guess the mediums in which they trust information. Energy has become a big conversation in the last few weeks, a few months, and particularly here in New Zealand. We've seen transition from, processing heat going from fossil fuels into electricity, but electricity's risen in about 2 to 3 times, meaning that increased operating costs across the board are making it challenging to make money as well. Globalization versus deglobalization is probably the conversation that we had in the last sort of 10 years. But in the last few years, we're sort of seeing more multipolar. And what I'm kind of, what I coin this is that trust is the new currency in global trade. So which countries are more aligned in values and trust each other is probably where some of the future markets will be, and where we play, as opposed to maybe the basis of economics and what we would typically work to. Changing demographics have been a big one. Obviously a shift of baby boomers 1 and 2 going into retirement over the next 5 years is a big one, not only stripping out massive tranches of labour forces, but also spend. And depending on which country you're talking to, just talking with clients recently, if you're talking about the UK, that age category of consumer would likely spend on themselves. But if you talk about the same thing in China, I personally, having a wife of Chinese descent, don't necessarily think that the generation that's going into retirement is going to spend on themselves. So there's some real big underlying assumptions there of, maybe transforming or reformatting products and what have you for age category that firstly take a long time to get formulas right, and secondly you have to be able to pitch to those markets. Whether or not those markets will actually exist and they will spend money on themselves will be interesting. Data policies and governance are a big one in terms of I guess the struggle to unite around what should be shared, what's the appropriate governance structure, can people be trusted, can countries be trusted. A lot of cybersecurity issues are making that quite challenging. inflation, rising cost of living, and unrest in general, I think, is pervade across the globe. So probably not too much to discuss there, but climate, nature, and getting to net zero has been a big part of the conversation so far. I think areas like TNFDs, or Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, are probably one that we haven't discussed this evening, that are becoming quite interesting and becoming a focus for some of New Zealand's big export clients anyway. And then equity or inequity, and this is interesting because quite often I will have clients discussing, New Zealand can feed 40 billion people, but the discussion's kind of moving away more so about who we feed, but how we feed. And what I mean by that is formats that are affordable to consumers in far off lands and nutrient dense products as being kind of where the conversation is going. But for tonight, I thought there's like a convergence of these three that I think has the potential to impact value propositions, rate or ability to adopt some of the technologies, or even capture some of the growth that we're currently seeing. So it's not necessarily kind of one thing in isolation. I think there is a convergence of factors that could have the potential to impact some of our opportunities that agri-tech industry actually has globally. It isn't a disruption per se, but it's a really good example of actually, things being turned inside out, upside down, whatever you want to call it. But big think out of New York or out of the US ran this kind of scenario, and the links there for people to have a look, that if we didn't get on top of climate change and the world, went to 4 degrees, what the illustration on the right shows is that there's like a massive belt through the middle of the world that becomes uninhabitable, meaning we won't be able to cultivate food there unless we have technologies to do so. But look at where the food basket of the world actually is. It's Siberia, it's Greenland, it's Iceland, part of the Antarctic. It's just incredible to kind of see, and it makes me, it blows my mind a little bit. But the other part to this is actually what they're calling climate migration. And don't quote me because I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it had New Zealand's populations over 100 million. It was just insane. So in other words, where your markets or where your products might sell better could fundamentally change, over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. We heard this saying before, and we could attribute this to Peter and Hilton actually in the contribution to the roundtables forming this year's agenda. Exactly what Bridgit said, regulators bark but retailers bite. Actually, some of our markets and our consumer needs are progressing faster than what our environment here is in New Zealand. So sometimes actually we're the laggards, or sometimes regulation in New Zealand is a laggard in comparison to what markets are actually asking of us. The other one that I wanted to kind of talk about here is the observation that food companies now assessing new sources of income. And I think Padraig talked about that lack of profitability at the farm level causing a real problem. Conversation here in New Zealand is sort of going to, creation of income from food and energy, and anaerobic digesters are now becoming more of an interesting topic of discussion. And while it might be prohibitive at an individual farm level, there's discussions around, is there an option to do it regionally? So collection of food loss, even food waste out of production systems, being able to put into some of these anaerobic digesters or create some sort of form of energy is where conversation's at. We did some work recently, and the reason why I'm sharing this is that we did some work with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We did 2 reports. In 2022, we did a dynamic risk assessment looking at a network of risks with agricultural businesses. We did the same assessment in 2024 with retailers, and it was really, really interesting to see that both of them highlighted uneconomical farming as a mutual risk, but it's a different priority. And the thing that made it really interesting for me was that Actually, it was number 5 for agribusinesses, i.e. food producers, but it was number 2 for retailers. And the interesting fact here is when you go through the assessment, it's really interesting. You're conversating with, these different organizations. And while there's tremendous efforts going in across the board and, from a board level to an executive level, and then, the implementation of sustainability teams, working with procurement teams, they came to this realization as we were going through the assessment that actually everyone left out finance. And so while the initiatives were there to implement a sustainability team to help set the targets and what have you, it goes through to procurement and say, this is what we need to get our heads around, and you start these initiatives. If you constrain the ability to reward those that actually are creating these efforts to create more sustainable food systems, then it kind of defeats the purpose. And then you get sort of the scenario that I think Padraig talked about earlier. So what also came from this is that there's a fundamental shifts on how partnerships are working. And the way those partnerships are working is rather than going from annual procurement cycles or even quarterly procurement cycles, they're now discussing 10-year horizons where, okay, if we can align better across a 10-year horizon and then there's maybe bi-directional investment upstream and downstream. So, and again, sort of to the same point, we're seeing a shift in the language being from the final mile of everything about the consumer to as much effort going into the first mile. And so my question to us is our time, but how do we position to win? And it's the who, what, when, and how kind of scenario, which I'm finding quite interesting. And then this is a conversation for next time. And just to wrap it up is our blue economy appears to be missing in a lot of our conversations when we talk AgriTech. AgriTech has a wider application and definition. And actually both our countries have significantly larger areas of ocean than it does in land mass. So another topic, another day, but nō reira, tēnā te mihi nui kia koutou. I hope that's helpful for everyone. So.
Kia ora, ka pai, Andrew. That's just fantastic. Thank you very much, Gormila Margaret. So many topics from both of you. Really appreciate your insights and introducing those topics. I guess from your last few slides there, Andrew, in particular, and just leaning back into the conversation with Bridgit and Padraig, and I think this risk of uneconomical farming, the fact that these new reporting requirements are actually for very good reasons. They're for reasons they're addressing existential issues, and yet the burden of that falling to that first mile to farmers and understanding how that happens. For our Irish audience, there's been one positive thing that I think has happened in New Zealand is where we have been looking at what needs to, about greenhouse gas reporting methodologies, that our Ministry for Primary Industries is looking at doing that actively through existing agri-tech providers. In other words, enabling the standards that any software application can report on in a way that if there are pricing calculations done on the back of those things, that still the reporting that might come from a variety of software applications seems like a really positive thing. Yes, David?
Brendan, can I just pop in there just to pick up on Andrew's couple of comments there? The blue economy is missing in the Irish conversation as well, Andrew. It's not really there. Secondly, in terms of AD, there's an awful lot of conversation around AD in Ireland. Getting capital to build AD plants isn't the issue. We work with a couple of AD companies. Planning permission is the issue, which is really Irish thing. And also access to feedstock is definitely something that's bubbling up to the top. Will you have that consistent access to feedstock? And my final comment, Brendan, I know it's tight. For AgTech companies in New Zealand and Ireland, for low and middle income countries where the government is maybe investing in creating their own sources of protein via, setting up dairy farms and stuff like that, low tech technology from the equipment manufacturers that maybe was high tech 20 years ago is actually very useful in those low and middle income companies and is a decent market. So we shouldn't, it's not all about, you know, the absolute bleeding edge of ag tech. Some of the low tech stuff that we have is very valuable in low and middle income countries and really moves on their ability to produce protein efficiently. So we just need to keep that in mind. And I suppose my final comment, Brendan, is we all love grass. Like, we are lovers of grass in Ireland and New Zealand, but the rest of the world isn't like. So we just need to make sure that we don't let that love of grass blind us as we develop propositions for a wider market.
Yeah, very much an active conversation across the New Zealand ecosystem for exactly those reasons. Whether it's, as you say, the blue economy piece, definitely plenty of opportunities there. That's been strongly recognised in the recent situational outlook for primary industries in New Zealand. That, you know, the seafood industry in New Zealand is currently 2.2 billion. By the way, the AgriTech sector is also 2 billion, and both of them have significant potential for growth. AgriTech, of course, is not whilst it has its own footprint and constraints, it doesn't have the same constraints that our natural resources do. It's an enabler for those things. So we see obviously lots of potential for AgriTech. That's the quick pitch. But to your point, you know, there's definitely a lot of conversations to have yet about ocean opportunities and technology pieces for that, and not a lot of pasture out in those areas, David. So yeah, definitely different opportunities.
I think just to add as well, just sorry, Brendan, just with some of those changes in markets, like we are seeing some fundamental shifts in language around what an export op model looks like with these changes of partnerships. We're seeing better discussions in and around fair value distribution, but we're also sort of seeing some changes to our own maybe rigidity on changes of how we price products. So rather than a cost plus export pricing model, we're talking about value-based pricing, dynamic-based pricing, which hopefully will kind of start to relook at how we export and create further value. There is already evidence here in New Zealand, and David, I think you're right, like some of the actual most basic forms of applying technologies can yield a lot. We're already seeing increased rates of return for those that have sustainability credentials, with insetting in and around carbon and what have you, and emissions, but then also just the activities across or insetting across a value chain are yielding results all the way through to consumers to, you know, a significant amount. I can't actually say exactly what it is, but it's an example.
I think we're already seeing evidence of agri-tech businesses responding to some of those opportunities where you see now sort of multi-generational. So you look at accelerometers or activity monitors and the like, and they're now sort of fifth or sixth generation almost, and being applied in simpler ways. And some of those becoming, and some of the cost prices of those beginning to shift as well and being looked at. That I see mastitis testing solutions that are actually learning from what were more complex systems, you know, several seasons ago, now becoming easier to apply and maybe being able to apply it in some of those other type of economies and sort of, you know, not just advanced systems. So things do shift there. Guys, one dinner session will never cut it with you two. It's always going to require a series and some late nights and you know, beyond just usual dinner hours. Thank you very much for your time and insights. I know you would have raised a lot of thoughts and questions for people, and that's an entirely healthy thing. So thank you very much for your time, guys.
Kia ora,
Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Andrew.
And now we sort of moving on to sort of the last segment of the last session, and it's another power session, of course. I'm feeling somewhat in awe making some of these introductions. First of all, introducing Sarah Perriam-Lamp, who's the creative director of Countrywide Media, and normally she'd be showing you how a job like this from an MC piece is done properly. I'm just an amateur throwing myself around the place, able to talk a bit. Sarah is an absolute genius at it. She is famous in New Zealand for her Sarah's Country podcast. She is well known for her a committed and honest and brave exploration of issues around primary sector and many other issues in New Zealand. So Sarah, thank you very much for joining us. I can see by the way you've been nodding that you've been enjoying some of the discussions previously. Maybe you could introduce yourself a little bit more and throw out some thoughts yourself in these type of arenas.
Oh, I actually feel like I myself am in great company as well with the intelligent conversation going on tonight. So I'm really honoured to be here, Brendan. I didn't quite get the dinner invite, but I just want to let you know that we had crayfish here tonight. So, you know, you may be invited next time. But thank you very, very much.
That's where we'll take it now.
Yeah, hey, thank you very, very much. Tēnā koutou katoa ko Mount Paisa toko monga ko mata Aotearoa no Cromwell aho. I am based in the South Island of New Zealand. My home and my whakapapa are actually in Central Otago, wine country. And but I am actually living in Methven, and we've had a beautiful dusting of snow. So anyone who's still keen on skiing can get some more runs in here in New Zealand. And as Brendan said, the Countrywide Media is a multimedia company we've recently acquired in the last 12 months to institutional legacy titles, Countrywide and Dairy Exporter. And we also have a lifestyle publication, New Zealand Life and Leisure. I've been involved in rural broadcasting and TV and radio for about 15 years now. And yeah, I really do enjoy the chunky topics and get myself into some interesting conversations at times, and really enjoy the international connection here tonight. I literally am 2 or 3 weeks from getting back from the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists, where we went to Switzerland on a congress, and it was an eye-opening experience for New Zealand journalists in a country that is on the low scale of to none of subsidies and one of the highest subsidized countries in the world, but also networking with a lot of agricultural journalists from other countries around the world and having those discussions. So yeah, nodding a lot around a lot of the similarities but differences that are really, really apparent. I've got a few slides really, really quick. I thought you were going to make me last, Brendan, you know, for knowing that I can speak quickly, but I will get through it so that we can have some conversations afterwards as well. So I'll just quickly share my screen. The topic, where are we? I just go up to, sorry, share, no, see, I'm usually in the... So New Zealand, this is the topic that Brendan threw at me. New Zealand's agricultural policy evolution, balancing environment and economic prosperity. A huge topic for a 5-minute discussion. So I'm going to try and do my absolute best to distill it for a global audience as best as I can. So here is a little bit of a timeline for those who aren't familiar with New Zealand's evolution. So this is actually the timeline of my life. I was born in the late 80s through to today. So the last 40 years has looked a little bit like this, and some on the call will remember some of these quite clearly. There was a deregulation of agricultural subsidies, the removal of subsidies in the late 80s, which has really set the path for where we are today. And very interestingly is happening, a lot of eyes are on New Zealand around what we did well and what we haven't done so well to learn from us. The dairy development really covers that whole period of time from 1994 to 2021, where 2021 is kind of talked about as peak milk. It goes as far back as when I left high school in 2003. There was tractor protests about fart tax and around proposed pricing of emissions back then. And I've been out of school now a really long time, and we're still having the similar protests, but we now know that it's more of a burp tax and a fart tax. So we have come somewhere in our education in that period of time. The Dairy and Clean Streams Accord really kicked off what we're now talking about with our freshwater policies and our freshwater farm plan rollout right through to last week when it was paused. So it's an evolution of stop-start. And what I believe has happened over this period of time has created a huge amount of uncertainty for planning and investment from farmers, and particularly in things like AgriTech. So the evolution has happened actually, as you can kind of see there, between a change of government and coalition governments over that period of time. The Dirty Dairying campaign was one that really triggered some huge change from a populist perspective, of course, making politicians very wary that the rural vote is actually quite small when it comes to election day. And so therefore, when we've had 6 years of a Labour coalition and Labour government, that's been front and centre. Some interesting characters, I'll get onto the next slide, have been interconnected through this timeline. From the fart tax protest through to the update of the MPS freshwater policy, and when it came in, Minister David Parker. And of course, overlying here, we've got two policy things that have been very strong, both emissions and freshwater policy. Obviously, we love being the first in the world, things like giving women the right to vote. We were the first in the world in so many things. We thought we'd try and be the first in the world to price agricultural emissions in 2022. And let's try and do it really quickly within 3 years. And for those who have been following New Zealand policy, we know the outcome of where we are now. Within the last year, we've seen an announcement at Field Days in June that the removal of ag emissions from the ETS, and we've seen a pause last week in the rollout of freshwater farm plans. However, in 2030 plus, we have what we're looking at with regards to New Zealand's markets pricing it in. So 2 slides, Game of 2 halves. This is the half that we've experienced in the last 6 years, and those 2 policy levers there. It shows clearly that AgriTech has leveraged off these 2 policies, and I know there's some on this call that are from these companies, so hopefully they're proud I put their logos on. But we've got from freshwater technologies, environmental-based technologies, fertilizer companies jumping on board around nutrient management, and of course farm software technologies through to wearables, right across the board. The selling point, the value proposition to farmers is how they will meet the regulations based around these 2 main policies. So we've got the 3 characters there along the bottom that became a big part of our life for a long period of time. Minister David Parker, Damien O'Connor for both primary industries and trade, and James Shaw from the Green Party, who was the Minister for Climate Change. And of course, we have had protests and pushback from our farming communities around some of the lack of detail, the lack of consultation, the pace of implementing the regulation, but at the same time, a lot of the companies sort of the writing on the wall, and a lot of the decisions were based on the pace of regulation as opposed to the markets, which both the speakers have spoken to so far. So just quickly, now where we are now, we're seeing things in the media like axed, thrown out, pause, a lot of these interesting words that what I try to remind my fellow colleagues in the primary sector in New Zealand is that we put stuff out there. It is global media, and that our markets do read what we are saying and discussing here in New Zealand. And we've got our new characters on the chessboard that I put Wayne Langford there at the top. He doesn't look very happy, but he is very happy now because his former president is now the Associate Minister of Agriculture and the Associate Minister for the Environment, which is, boots on the ground for our Minister of Trade, who is spending a lot of time offshore, and our Minister of Climate Change that we don't hear from very much and has been sort of criticised for having a plan on 3 pages for climate change. So it's a really different environment than it was, as Bridgit pointed out as well. But on the left, and I took that from Trev, one of our companies here's slide shows, whether we like it or not, this is what's coming at us from our markets. So just to leave you there, I did also want to put a little plug in, Brendan, because that's what you do when you get a chance, is that, and Andrew will be hopefully really happy with me. If you get a chance, head to the commonground.org.nz, freshly released a day or so ago. And what it does talk to is really around, are we structured for what we have got going forward, and the challenges, and having those really hard and chunky conversations. So it's such a quick period of time, Brendan, to be able to cover off that. But in terms of AgriTech's advantage and challenges around that, I just wanted to echo that understanding that farmers can see from the value exchange of utilizing AgriTech isn't clear, because we don't have clear market signals back to our farmers and growers because we're so far away from our markets. And the erosion of trust that's happened over the last period of time from an array of different things that have happened, from both activism and, of course, government regulation and policy. I think that it's a really interesting environment to be in. But there's also huge opportunities with Ireland around our similarities and our differences to be able to meet that scale, because the size of the markets is so small for us to be anything scalable here. So yeah, really interesting space to be in.
What a fantastic
I hope I didn't upset anybody on either side.
No, I think it was no. I think even people who had their photograph shown there won't necessarily be upset, even though it puts in a context of the level of changes that we've seen. And actually, you're introducing that AgMark KPMG piece on Common Ground is highly relevant, of course, because of course the main call out there is some reflection on what real collaborative practice looks like, and really looking at, related pieces of work around, what's the relationship between politics and policy setting when policies are trying to really make significant and lasting change that's required long beyond any particular government cycles. And there are some things that, that need to persist because they're existential. They're absolutely existential from a planetary perspective. They're existential from a food production perspective. And so, the shifts that we've seen in New Zealand, where we flip-flop and we see this garbage can policy making, rather than actually trying to pull out, going, we're going to do it differently, but we're going to take the 10 or 20% of the previous policies that we think are good and look at continuing them. I think there's a responsibility to doing that, and that's not currently what we're seeing. So that common ground piece is important, not just for the industry good associations that it talks about, but also their relationship in our political and our policy making scene when we need those policies to have impacts beyond a political term. And so, yeah, really great overview in that history piece, and so many conversations I'd like to have with you about it, Sarah. Even from that starting point around your birthday, when subsidies were taken off, and given the type of change, given we talk about adoption and we talk about the level of change that now needs to happen, is it time for New Zealand to reflect on using every tool we have to make the levels of change? And the idea of no subsidies is not that I necessarily advocate for subsidies, but we need to look at every tool in our within our reach to be enabling the level of changes that need to happen, especially when we have that first mile, as Andrew calls about it, fundamentally influencing everything else that's happening along the value chain. So do we need to look at supporting the adoption of new practice and technologies in different ways rather than just market dynamics?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from an age perspective, the rate of change for our generation, we accept and adopt a lot faster, and will understand and adopt faster with that. But at the same time, I mean, coming back to that structure, it's a structure that hasn't been evolved for a continual improvement of a feedback loop of what our needs are now. And so, from the ability to have the knowledge extension come down to the ground, but also the investment to be paired with it, whilst it made sense, a deregulation at the time for the certain situations, what does that balance look like now when our economy is so heavily reliant on the success of agricultural exports?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Sarah. Wish we had more time. This dinner party needs to continue. We should look for extensions to the dinner party, but thank you very much, and that was really great insights. Our final dinner guest tonight, and a great honour to have him here. I know that Andrew's introduction of the blue economy might be one that quite interests Colm Markey, because I know you've been a champion for Irish fisheries in many conversations over the years. Colm is Fine Gael, member of European Parliament, has been a fisheries champion. Colm, thank you very much for joining us this morning, this evening. Would love to hear some of your perspectives on what's changing out there and what sort of impacts in European policy maybe has an influence over the role of AgriTech within our economies.
Thanks very much. Delighted to be here. Delighted to be listening to the conversation as much as being part of it. Just, I suppose, a little like everyone else, a little bit of my own background and context. You referenced the fisheries industry. The fisheries industry is only a sideshow to me because I suppose my background is in farming. I'm farming since I was 17. Dairy herd, approximately 300 cows, grass-based systems. So very much what Ireland and New Zealand have in common. And I suppose from my perspective, my journey in relation to all this probably goes back about, farming well over 20 years, but my journey in terms of the public end of it goes back 20 years to when I was president of the Young Farmers Organisation in Ireland. And it's quite interesting because I won't do a whole run through, but I'll take a reference from there and a reference from now. When I was president of MOCRA in Ireland, it was all about the removal of quotas, grass was God, and what they're doing in New Zealand. And that was 20 years ago. I think we very much built our industry on the knowledge that we gained from New Zealand at that stage. And I'd like to think that we've added to that enormously from the Irish side in terms of both countries' profile in that 20 years. But I think where we are now is completely different. I suppose I look at that to when I entered the European Parliament 4 or 5 years ago. And basically, the situation is it's all about sustainability, not just agriculture. Across the board, it's all about sustainability now. I think it was David or Padraig mentioned about the emissions targets. I mean, 34% of Irish emissions are associated with agriculture, and where the challenges are in relation to that. I think if you look across Europe and you talk, it's all about sustainability. It's all about water quality, air quality, biodiversity, and animal welfare, probably the 4 big ones that come up constantly. And I think the point is the debate is really in two halves. And this is what we really have to recognise. There's those who believe we need to change and those who believe we need to stop. And for me, the second group are the concerning one. That ultimately, if you like, even the strategic dialogue that's been talked about at the moment, there are those who believe, frankly, that we can find the solutions through the like of AgTech. And as the lads know, I've been a big champion of theirs in my time in recent years. But there's those who frankly don't believe and don't believe what's been said. And if you like, they see the only solution. Where do you produce food from? I don't know, but I think primarily livestock farming is the one that's in focus and in target. And I think that, for me personally, is a big challenge because that's what my personal business is built on. And I think the job of AgTech, as much as it is to find the solutions, is to prove that the solutions work. And because you can come up with the solutions, but if people don't believe, then you're never going to get the opportunity to deploy those solutions. And so as much as it is about creating, it's demonstrating. And I think if you move on from there to what we need to do, I suppose, look, it's all about measuring where we're at. Reducing the if you like, the impact on the environment, efficient production, the like of animals in transport, demonstrating that good welfare in terms of animals in transport, which is one, demonstrating that our grass-based model which we have to bear in mind that we're different from the rest of Europe in terms of European policy. We stand alone. We are more competitive by and large, but we stand alone. So it may not always suit politically for our system to be recognised as being a more environmentally efficient and financially efficient system. So sometimes we've a battle to fight to even get a hearing. And I think where it's going in terms of, people have said that it's all market led. That is true, that the market probably is asking for things ahead of people see it arriving in policy. But oftentimes the policy for the market is formed before the policy for the user. So is sustainable corporate due diligence reporting, for example, is a classic example for that. The trickle-down effect of that will happen at farm level, begin to happen now. But that has been formed at policy level a number of years ago. Markets and buyers started talking about that in the context of it being formed back then. So right, the markets may have formed the agenda, but really the markets are informed by where policy is heading. So I think where policy is heading is very important. And from a New Zealand perspective, I think it's important it was mentioned by some of the other speakers, that there's no doubt Europe tries to be the champion of best in class in terms of standards and performance across the world. And by so doing, then impacts on other markets, or other people have to match a kind of a European but primarily a European standard in the markets it goes into. So I think for New Zealand, it's just as important to be watching European regulation and where it's going. I think the CSDD, we were mentioned, I think, by Dave, CSDD, green claims, CBAM, they're some of the main ones. But at a farm level, then, the ability to reduce emissions, to cut those, to reduce those, particularly air and water quality emissions. I know it was interesting to mention too the New Zealand policy in the last couple of years, because I met New Zealand representatives in Europe. I met them about 10 times, because I kept saying to them, who's going to pay for this? And because you don't do subsidies, who's going to pay for this? And they said, well, the market's going to pay for it. And I said, well, to my evidence, the market has never paid for anything. It's talked about it and marketed it in a way. But to get the actual market to pay for it is very difficult. And that's one of the areas where I think AgTech comes into play, because we have to be able to measure, quantify and value. If you don't look at things, one policy that was involved at European level in recent times is, let's say, carbon farming, for instance. You have to be able to quantify carbon equivalents. And then you have to be able to verify that they've been reduced. So the ability to report and efficiently report for CSDD, CSDR, and equally to verify, if you like, or to achieve, the reductions. But also, there's a big part of this is to convince people you're actually doing it rather than saying you're doing it. Because I think agriculture and every industry probably has the be guilty of talking a good story over the years and maybe not necessarily delivering it. And so people are a little more cynical about whether they actually believe or not. So one big part, I think, of getting on board in all these journeys is that you have to be able to convince people, genuinely demonstrate to them in a meaningful way that what your claim is, it actually does it. And I think that's going to be a big question for industry. It's going to be an opportunity for AgTech to be able to verify. It's also going to be an opportunity for AgTech, or a responsibility for AgTech, to make sure whatever claims they're making, they can stand over them. Because Padraig's point about 2030 is right. We are going to come at a cliff edge at one point. It's going to come. We may achieve a certain amount in reducing our emissions, but the level of emissions that's needed to be reduced, I think it'll be a miracle if we get that far. So the cliff edge is going to come, and then the questions are going to be asked. And the people who have the genuine answers, the genuine solutions, all of a sudden will be the ones to be relevant. And the ones who have the spin and the marketed solutions will fall by the wayside. And I think maybe a little bit of not having a go or anything, but a little bit of the New Zealand policy around pricing air emissions or building in air emissions called that out a little because there was no answer and it had to be reversed from. And that's not a criticism. I think Europe has countless examples of the same. But so I think from where we're at, the strategic dialogue at European level is very important at the moment. And it's probably going down two roads. One is there would be those who would say less livestock. And there's those who are saying we need technology for solutions. So from my perspective, I think it's very important that we get the solution thing right. And I say it from my own interest in my own industry, as a stakeholder in the industry. I also say it from the broader, as a member of the global community, someone who lives on planet Earth. We have to get it right on both levels. So I worry at a couple of levels as regards where we are, the group that's on this forum. Because I genuinely believe we're in a very good position as regards the grass-based agricultural model. I genuinely believe we've a sustainability edge, certainly when it comes to if we believe in livestock. But I worry at two levels. I worry that we're outliers in terms of the policy formation because not everyone believes in grass-based model. And I worry that we're on the wrong side of an animal livestock debate, which we have to win very quickly, or we'll be out constantly on the back foot of that. And I think they're basically the 2 points. One other point or a couple of other points I'll probably throw into it is, in terms of where I see Ireland at the moment, I don't know if New Zealand is the same. Something that was relevant 15 years ago has become relevant again. And indeed, 15 years ago was probably New Zealand solutions that helped a lot in this. And that's the whole ask for labour. Like in Ireland, we've scaled up from, you might as well say, anecdotally, the typical significant herd was 100 cows. This typical significant herd, like we were on 100 cows 20 years ago. We're now on 300 cows. We're very typical of an Irish farm, a serious dairy farm. The need for the solutions to that was built on the technologies that came from New Zealand and was built on by Ireland in the last 20 years. That technologies will be needed again in the labour space, because I think there's going to be a new wave of, it's something that happens suddenly. It happens with illness in a family. It happens with a loss of staff. It happens with no successor. That all of a sudden the labour requirement becomes more relevant, and suddenly we've a problem that we can't solve, and you can't solve the labour. You can't put all those solutions in place overnight. So labour is one that we kind of forget about, is very important. But outside of that, I think to be able to continue to do what we do, we need to be able to measure and prove that the changes we're making are making a difference. We need to find the solutions for those changes, and we need to, if you like, be able to deploy them effectively on the ground. And I think that's the challenge, and that challenge very much sits with AgTech in my book, because I think AgTech are the people that actually can find the solutions. I know that's probably a short and brief point to it. I think just one thing that was mentioned earlier, a couple of other little snippets I'll try and jump on just as I go. Finance and if you like, what do you call it, sustainable finance is a part of this that will be important going forward, I think, in terms of where we're actually going to, if we're to scale some of these solutions. I think land use and a land use strategy, when you look at the pressures that are coming on land, the demands that are coming on land, I think that's going to be critical. And if you look at that in terms of, well, demonstrating which is the most sustainable model, to me, AgTech, the biggest thing you have to do is prove it. Find a solution, great. You have to prove the solution, but even apart from finding the solution, prove the methodologies, prove the systems, prove everything, record and verify. So proving what we're doing, if you want to sell it to the market, if you want to sell it to a regulator, you have to be able to prove it. And for me, the future of AgTech, the future of agriculture, is to be able to prove that what you're able to do. And that to me, and all the rest is important too. But you won't sell it if you can't prove it. They won't make policy for it if you can't prove it. And that really what it boils down to. So for me, that is, if you want to, where the whole thing is going into the future, I think that's the space it's at. It's to be able to prove and verify.
That's a great battle cry, Colm. I think you've really sort of encapsulated a lot of the discussion points and the reason for why we need to be, first of all, as you say, looking at that sort of change or stop type dynamic and the perception of different livestock systems and how they need to be viewed differently. New Zealand and Ireland are not in competition with each other. We're in competition with a lot of other beliefs and a lot of other views. So the role for collective action and for looking at how we do things together and how we present things together. And then the second battle cry is, as you say, being able to prove it. And that's where things come from an AgriTech perspective. It ties into Andrew's comments about trust and data and what that means. And again, that's a collective piece, so much as the most important things that we need to do between New Zealand and Ireland is not competitive action. It is actually that collective action, because we're not competing against each other. We're competing against other systems and other beliefs. And likewise, from an AgriTech perspective, we're at a relatively early stage, although both Padraig and Bridgit talk about how, we're seeing this evolution of how AgriTech is being perceived, the role of corporates investing, the role of adoption improving, and all those things. But also from an AgriTech perspective, I believe we've also got a collective piece of work to do where, if one technology overclaims and dirties the market because it doesn't deliver what it needs to, everyone suffers. And that proof of data, that proof that you're looking for, that's not proof from any one system. That's proof from the collections of those systems. What is the level of data mobility and data sharing, data verification that allows those systems, multiple systems, to be able to prove different things? Because there's going to be no one platform to rule them all. There's going to be a combination of many needing to prove this piece of information from this part of the farm, this piece of information from that part of the farm, and by the way, a different combination farm to farm. So the battle cry that you've got is for a level of collaboration across the AgriTech ecosystem as much as there is between nations.
Yeah, but beyond that too, and I think it's important, is access to the decision makers as well. I think it's important that and I don't mean just the decision makers. I think there's a problem in all of this debate that there's kind of silos and echo chambers and people talking to themselves. And there's a group of people that's on this call today which will discuss within that forum and within countless other forums of the same nature. They'll discuss what they see as the solutions and how they believe in those solutions. There'll be people in a completely different silo who will not understand and not appreciate or have no concept of how these might or could actually deliver what they're asking. So reaching across is very important to those who see it the other way. And I don't mean it is not just a battle cry. It's just it's important at a very basic, down to earth level that we don't spend our time talking to each other, giving out about the person who doesn't. We have to reach across and get into a conversation with them. But more importantly, we have to get to the like of that strategic dialogue, to the like of, if you like, the decision making and not even the decision, but the construction of the logic about where the future is going. We have to be able to feed into that, say, yes, there is a way that can work. Like we all in agriculture latch on to, and Padraig touched on it about the methane inhibitors. And the methane inhibitors have been the story of the last 5 years. Now, some have sold it too well, said 80% reductions, and it'll be the problem and it'll solve. Others have kind of dampened that a bit. People beyond that think this is just a yarn to allow farmers, yarn being an Irish phrase, I don't know if it translates to New Zealand, but a myth that allows farmers to continue to do what they're doing. So, I think at one level, people have to be up for change. Secondly, you have to communicate that to others, but most importantly, you have to be able to verify it and demonstrate it to those that are looking, that will be at that cliff edge saying, what are we going to do? Yes, we have a solution. Yes, it is a real solution. Yes, it's not hyped up or talked about like it was before. And so I think it's at that level that, and I know the lads know my efforts when I was in the Parliament was to try and bridge those gaps and open those doors so that conversation would happen. I think it fell to some degree on deaf ears. And I think it's something that's, as much as the work itself in finding the solution to the technology is important, it's equally important. It's no good having the solutions if no one believes in them. And I think that's kind of, I don't know if I can leave it at that.
Colin, thank you very much for calling that out and giving that insight in terms of, the importance of whatever we're doing, being able to reach out to the decision makers, reaching out to people that might have differing views and engaging there. And so, I'll if I had the editing ability to take out my phrase of battle cry, I probably would remove that now, and appreciate your further insight into the job ahead, really, in terms of the type of both collaborative effort, but also communicating across what might be seen as divides, looking, reaching out to people that have differing views and aligning some of our stories to do that. We've totally blown our timing. Some people have had to go to bed. Some people have had to start their working day. Luckily, this is a recorded session, so all of the insights that we've captured here will live on and be reviewed by many others. Padraig, I did notice you turned off your microphone and stuff. Would you like? Have you got a final comment or question you'd like to make?
Just one final comment. I had the pleasure of watching AgTech's new documentary last week, A World Without Cows. It helps put a bit of counter argument, I suppose, to some of the narrative that's out there, and I certainly would encourage anybody to watch that, because it talks about the importance of cows and grazing systems and pasture in a world context. So I just like to put that out there, that it's something, if anybody has the opportunity to see it, certainly see it and share it, because we do need to get out the other side of the story. It's really important. It's very unbalanced, the arguments that are out there at the moment.
Excellent. And this is only one dinner party. I think we need a series of dinner parties, and to keep these type of discussions going. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today, Bridgit, Padraig, David, Andrew, Sarah, Colin. Really appreciate your time and insights. I think we maybe haven't answered all of the questions that we would have liked to have answered, but we have definitely had the discussion and posed the questions that we all need to have in our minds as we look at what impact AgriTech can have for our primary food production systems and the role that we're in there. In terms of dinner parties are concerned, this definitely isn't the only opportunity. We know that there are many other shared perspectives between New Zealand and Ireland that we also want to give some airtime to and some continued discussions around. So on November 6th, we will have another webinar specifically looking at what does progress of adoption look like and what's happening with farmers on the ground in New Zealand and in Ireland, and bring some actual practitioners together to get their perspectives on how AgriTech is serving their purposes and what's their view of adoption as we've discussed it today. And then at the beginning of the next year, on February 11th, we'll look at the innovation pipeline, what is happening from an investment and a startup perspective, and what's happening there. So plenty of dinner parties to happen. Thank you again, everyone who came, who's joined in today. I am looking forward to attending the ploughing, New Zealand or Ireland's version of Field Days for Kiwis. And so I look forward to meeting some of the New Zealand companies that are visiting Ireland right now. I know that NZTE are also hosting an on-farm day for New Zealand technologies on February 27th in Clonmore and Tipperary. We've got companies like Levno and Galler and LIC presenting their wares there. So some good discussions around those shared technology pieces. And of course, Enterprise Ireland and the team are going to be both hosting some New Zealand people here, but looking at enticing some more Irish companies to come down and look at the New Zealand market and to continue that dynamic at Field Days next June. So plenty of opportunities over the next week to continue that going. Thank you, everyone, for dialing in. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you very much to AgTech Ireland, to Catherine, and to Padraig and David for collaborating on this. And to Georgia on the AgriTech New Zealand side, who has done all of the hard work in the background to bring us together. Sleep well or have a good day. Look forward to seeing you all again soon.